A 67-year-old widow was fined $500 just for feeding a stray cat under an oak tree. The HOA president, Sandra Myers, used petty bylaws to shame her publicly and threaten her home. But June had one quiet ally, a city officer with a badge and the law on her side. And you won't believe how this simple act of kindness turned into a public victory that silenced the HOA for good. June Ellis wasn't the type to make waves. She'd lived in Westbrook Commons for 12 quiet years, keeping mostly to herself since her husband Carl passed away. Each morning, just after sunrise, she slipped out the back gate with a small dish of kibble and a bowl of clean water. She'd place them gently under the same old oak tree near the drainage ditch, where Benny always waited. Benny wasn't hers. Not officially. He had the slow gait and nicked ear of a tomcat who'd lived too many winters outdoors, but he'd chosen June the way some animals do, without words, just presence. He'd show up, meow once, and curl by her feet while she hummed to him softly. In a life that had grown too quiet, Benny brought back something she hadn't realized she'd missed: companionship. So, when she opened her door one morning to find a thick envelope jammed between the storm door and the handle, her first thought was that it was another community newsletter. Instead, it felt like a slap. The paper inside was cold and sterile. Violation notice, unauthorized feeding of wildlife. Fine, $500, immediate compliance required. There was no contact name, just the stamped emblem of the HOA and a reference to bylaw 14.6b, whatever that meant. Her breath caught in her throat. June stood in her kitchen rereading it 5 times, her tea growing cold beside her. Wildlife? Benny wasn't a raccoon or a coyote. He was a hungry old cat with nowhere else to go. And $500? That was 2 weeks of groceries. Still clutching the letter, she marched, hands shaking, across the courtyard to the brick building where the HOA board held their meetings. The door was open. Inside stood Sandra Myers, the board president, fussing with her phone. Sandra had the look of someone always in charge, salon-styled hair, heels even on weekends, and that permanent squint people wear when they're already tired of you before you speak. June held up the notice. "Sandra, what is this? I feed one cat, a stray. He's harmless." Sandra didn't look up from her phone. "It's attracting vermin. There have been complaints." June blinked. "Complaints? From who?" "Doesn't matter," Sandra said coolly, finally meeting her eyes. "If you love animals, take them to a shelter. You can't keep feeding them here." Then she gave a tight, unsmiling nod and turned on her heel. June watched her walk briskly to her silver Lexus, heels clicking against the concrete like punctuation. The door slammed. The engine started. June was left standing in the late morning sun, holding a violation slip like it was an eviction notice from her own decency. And Benny, unaware of all of it, waited patiently under the oak tree, hoping for breakfast. June Ellis never thought kindness could come with paperwork, but when she showed up at the HOA office, envelope in hand and check already written for the full $500, the young woman at the desk slid the check back across the counter. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Payment can't be processed unless the compliance form is also signed." June adjusted her glasses. "What form?" The woman pulled out a fresh sheet of paper typed in dense legal language. "This states you agree to cease all unauthorized feeding of stray or wild animals. Permanent compliance is required to resolve the violation." June stared at the words. Her name was printed at the bottom with a line ready for her signature. Her hands went cold. "So, I can't just pay the fine?" she asked, voice quiet. "No, ma'am. Without the agreement, the fines continue to accrue weekly." That night, the HOA board held an open meeting. June didn't attend, but her name came up, Sandra Myers, in a neatly pressed pantsuit, and sipping from a branded HOA tumbler, addressed the small group of residents seated in folding chairs. "It's not about the money," she said, a slight curl at the corner of her lips. "It's about setting an example. If we allow this behavior, we open the door to infestations. We are a community, not a shelter." The next morning something shifted. Whispers started, not loud or direct, just soft comments passed between neighbors while walking their dogs or checking the mail. Some people began crossing to the opposite side of the path when June came outside. One woman from Unit 14 angled her blinds just wide enough to hold up her phone and record. "She's encouraging them," someone murmured on the HOA Facebook page. "Today it's a cat. Tomorrow it's raccoons." June read the comments once, then never checked again. And yet, Benny came. Even now, even still, he came. He'd pad across the mulch like clockwork, slow but faithful. June adjusted her schedule, waiting until dusk when the courtyards were quiet. She'd carry a clean bowl wrapped in a cloth and place it gently under the tree, her hand brushing Benny's scruffy fur as he nuzzled her wrist. "Come on, sweetheart," she'd whisper, kneeling by the roots. "They can't find love." But the system didn't tire. A new envelope arrived 2 weeks later, this time certified. Another fine, $750, and a formal notice that if non-compliance continued, the HOA would pursue lien action, potentially placing her home at risk. June stood at her kitchen sink, holding the letter as if it might vanish. Outside the window, Benny sat patiently on the stone path, tail flicking, golden in the fading light. And for the first time, June didn't cry. She simmered. June Ellis had always been gentle, but not naive. And after the second fine, after the looks and the whispers and the threat hanging over her home like storm clouds, she sat down at her kitchen table and made a single call. "Debbie," she said softly when her friend picked up, "I think I need your help." Debbie Tran had been June's neighbor 2 towns back, long before either of them had gray hair. Now she worked with Greene County Animal Services, carrying a badge and a temperament as steady as her voice. The two women hadn't seen each other in years, but some friendships don't fade, especially the ones built on trust. 2 days later, Debbie pulled into Westbrook Commons in a marked government SUV, stepped out in full uniform, and greeted June with a hug that lasted just a second too long. "Let's take a look at this menace you've been harboring," she said with a dry smile. They waited by the oak tree as twilight fell. Sure enough, Benny appeared, slow and cautious, winding through the grass like he always did. Debbie knelt beside him and scratched behind his ear. "Old boy's been through a lot," she murmured. Then, clipboard in hand, she began observing, documenting. She took photos, noted the clean food and water dishes, the fixed location, the consistency of care. She inspected the area. No signs of waste, no other animals, no evidence of the so-called infestation the HOA had warned about. Back at the table, Debbie flipped open her logbook and wrote with deliberate precision, "This is not wildlife feeding. This is routine, compassionate care for an identified stray, pending rescue registration." She signed and stamped it with her city-issued ID. Then she looked up. "And June, I already spoke with the shelter. They want to meet Benny, and they want to meet you." What June didn't know, but would soon learn, is that Greene County's shelter director had long been pushing for more community-based fosters. Debbie had told them about June's consistency, about the care, the patience, the early mornings and quiet evenings under the tree. They were impressed. More than that, they were grateful. By the end of the week, the Westbrook Commons HOA received a certified envelope of their own. It wasn't a check. It was a cease and desist drafted and signed by the Greene County City Attorney. It outlined in very specific legal language that June Ellis's care for Benny was within the bounds of Municipal Ordinance 5.7a, which protected registered caretakers and pending shelter fosters from private interference. The letter further stated that continued harassment or financial threats would be considered unlawful overreach and subject to investigation. The HOA had barked at the wrong woman, and now the system they used to intimidate had come full circle, with a badge, a statement, and a warning of its own. The folding chairs were mismatched, the microphone squeaked every time someone tapped it, and the community center stage was nothing more than a raised platform with a paper banner overhead. But for June Ellis, standing there in her pressed cardigan and sunflower brooch, It might as well have been the grandest hall in the state. 3 weeks had passed since the city's cease and desist landed on the HOA board's desk like a dropped gavel. No apology came, not in writing, not in words, but the fines vanished. So did the threats. And just as quietly, the gossip dried up. Then came a phone call from the Greene County Animal Shelter. They were planning their annual volunteer appreciation event, and they had something a little different in mind this year. Now, as June stood between rows of shelter staff, volunteers in green shirts, and families with rescue pets on their laps, a local reporter adjusted her camera lens and gave June a gentle smile. "Ready?" she whispered. June nodded, her hands trembling only slightly. The shelter director stepped up and tapped the microphone. "Every year," she began, "we honor those who show up for animals in need. But this year, we're recognizing something else: quiet courage, persistence in the face of ridicule, and the kind of compassion that doesn't seek reward, only warmth, and maybe a soft place for a cat to sleep." She turned to June, eyes kind. This woman didn't just feed a stray. She stood up for kindness when others called it a nuisance. She gave shelter, not just to a forgotten animal, but to an idea. That simple care can be an act of defiance, and that doing the right thing doesn't need permission. A round of applause swelled through the room as June was handed a wooden plaque engraved with her name, Community Partner of the Year, June Ellis. She pressed a tissue to her eyes. It wasn't the award that made her cry. It was the quiet validation. That all those early mornings, all that worry, all the fear of losing her home hadn't been for nothing. The story hit the local paper's weekend column and made its way online. Comments poured in, people from all over the county writing things like, "This is what a real community looks like," and "Bless her heart." Even a local school's 5th grade class mailed her hand-drawn thank you cards with sketches of Benny in crayon. And Westbrook Commons? They stayed quiet. The HOA issued no press release. No one dared bring up bylaws. And Sandra Myers, she stepped down 3 months later. The official reason was stress and personal commitments. But no one missed her HOA memos, not even her closest supporters. As for Benny, he still made his morning rounds. Only now, he didn't have to wait in shadows. The Greene County Shelter had formally registered him under June's care. He had a fresh vet record, a soft indoor bed when he wanted it, and a new collar with a silver tag that read, "Benny, belongs to June." June still set his bowl under the oak tree sometimes, more out of habit than need. But now, as neighbors passed, they'd smile. Some even stopped to pet him. A few left treats on her porch, and once, just once, a small card appeared tucked under her doormat. No name, just handwriting that said, "Thank you for reminding us what kindness looks like." June tucked it in her kitchen drawer next to the plaque, because sometimes the quietest victories are the ones that echo longest.